It is coming through the console again. It is coming through the... It is inside the housing. I can see it. I can see the tip of it just... It is finding the gap at the back of the terminal. It shouldn't be able to find anything. This room is sealed. The room is... Log note. The primary root tendril has breached Station 7. It has a diameter of approximately... It has the diameter of my wrist. It is the same color as a vein. I don't want to look at it anymore. I am not going to... That is not feedback. That is not the equipment. That is the tree. What you just heard was not a dramatization. That recording was recovered from a magnetic reel-to-reel unit found inside a decommissioned government installation located beneath the Chestnut Ridge of the Appalachian Highlands in the southwestern corner of what federal documents refer to obliquely, always obliquely, as Zone 9. The file you are about to hear summarized was submitted to a congressional subcommittee in the spring of 1992 and subsequently classified under Executive Order 12,958, subsection C. It was not declassified. It was not reviewed. It was placed in a box. The box was placed in a building, and the building no longer appears on any map I have been able to locate. I am reading to you from a photocopy of that document. I will not say how I obtained it. I will tell you that the man who gave it to me told me he had not slept well in 4 years. He told me that sometimes, when the wind comes down off a wooded hill and moves through old timber, he still hears something in it. He is not wrong to. The file is designated Protocol Deep Root, case number 88B, and it begins, as so many terrible things do, with a very reasonable idea. The Chestnut Ridge in November is a particular kind of quiet. By late autumn, the leaves have come down from the red maples and the tulip poplars. The birches stand white and skeletal against the gray. The undergrowth has collapsed into itself. All that summer density reduced finally to brown matter and wet silence. You can see deep into the forest in November, and what you see mostly is absence. But on a particular bluff overlooking the Tug Fork River Valley, one tree does not participate in the seasonal withdrawal. The white oak, known in local records as the alderman, so named by a surveyor in 1791, who reportedly stood at its base, looked up through its crown, and felt, in his own words, as though I had interrupted something, was estimated at the time of the government's acquisition of the surrounding land in 1981 to be approximately 400 years old. It was 68 feet tall. Its crown spread 112 feet in diameter, and its root system, mapped by government geologists using ground-penetrating seismic equipment, extended in all directions for a lateral distance of nearly 300 feet, reaching depths of over 40 feet in places, threading through bedrock, finding water, finding dark. Beneath that root system, beginning in 1982, the federal government built Site 9. The facility was modest by the standards of the era. The primary briefing describes it as a signal research installation, language that in the bureaucratic lexicon of the early Reagan administration could mean almost anything, and in practice usually meant something that no one wanted to describe more specifically. Sublevel 1, Administration and Communications. Sublevel 2, Personnel Quarters and Laboratory Spaces. Sublevel 3, the Equipment Bays, the Generator Room, and what the schematics label simply as the Interface Chamber. The concrete was poured around the roots. Let me say that again so it settles properly. The geotechnical engineers did not reroute the root system. They did not attempt to sever it or reroute the building's footprint to avoid it. They designed the facility explicitly around the existing root architecture of the alderman oak, pouring the walls and floors in sections, accommodating the intrusions, sealing around the roots with a polymer compound, and continuing on. According to the project design rationale, and I am paraphrasing here from a document that uses words like novel bioconductive medium and naturally occurring signal propagation substrate, the roots of the alderman had demonstrated what the engineers called a remarkable electrical receptivity. The oak, in other words, could carry a signal, and so they decided to use it as one. The interior of Site 9, as described by personnel logs from the first year of operation, was precisely what you would expect from a mid-1980s federal installation built by people who had been told to be economical. The walls were poured concrete, unfinished, bare gray surfaces that wept condensation in the autumn and winter months, leaving long mineral streaks that the staff reportedly began, in private, to refer to as the weeping. The floors were institutional tile, cream-colored, scuffed from the first week. The overhead fixtures hummed at a frequency that several personnel noted in their medical logs interfered with their sleep. That frequency was 60 hertz, the frequency at which, as it turns out, certain biological tissues resonate sympathetically. Nobody flagged that as significant. Not then. Through the walls, visible in certain sections of the facility where the polymer ceiling had been applied in a thin coat. You could see them, the roots. They pressed against the concrete from the outside like slow, dark fingers. In the equipment bay on sub-level 3, where the ceiling was lower and the air always smelled faintly of damp earth, despite every filtration system running at full capacity, a section of primary root, approximately 8 inches in diameter, ran diagonally across the upper corner of the eastern wall, sealed, contained, catalogued in the facility logbook as Root Intrusion Section 7E, non-structural, benign. Benign. The project designated Deep Root was officially initiated in March of 1984. The working hypothesis was elegant, in the way that certain dangerous ideas are always elegant before you discover what they actually are. The research team, 6 scientists, 2 engineers, and a signals analyst on rotation from a facility in Maryland whose name appears in the file only as Station 12, believed they had identified a mycorrhizal signaling network of unusual complexity within the alderman's root system. Mycorrhizal networks are not unusual themselves. Any forester will tell you that the roots of trees communicate chemically through fungal threads, passing nutrients, passing warnings, passing something that is not quite information, but functions in its slow and primordial way like information. What was unusual about the alderman's network was the frequency range of its electrochemical activity. It fell, specifically, within a range that partially overlapped with the electromagnetic signatures produced by the human brain during deep sleep. The research team did not find this alarming. They found it interesting. There is a difference between those two responses, and the case file is a 400-page illustration of why that difference matters. By the summer of 1985, the team had succeeded in using the root network as what the file terms a passive bioantenna. They were transmitting low-frequency signals through the roots and recording what came back. What came back was described in the early reports as ambient biological noise, fragments of pattern, interference that resembled occasionally a rhythm. Then, in September of 1985, a technician named Raymond Folger filed what the case file calls an anomalous auditory report. He heard something in the ventilation system. Not the mechanical groan of the ductwork, which everyone heard and had catalogued and assigned maintenance tickets to and ignored. Not the settling of the concrete, which in a deep installation is a constant companion. What Folger described was a voice. Not a clear voice, not words. He described it as, and this is a direct quotation from his incident report, a voice that is almost finished saying something, the way a word sounds in the half-second before you recognize what it is. He was the first to report it. He was not the last. By January of 1986, all 9 personnel at Site 9 had filed some variant of the anomalous auditory report. The ventilation was inspected. The ductwork was cleaned, resealed, re-inspected. The sounds continued. They were loudest, if louder is the right word for something that remained always just at the threshold of hearing. They were most present, most insistent, in the rooms closest to root intrusion section 7E. In the room closest to the root, a researcher named Dr. Adeze Okafor began keeping a supplementary log. She did not file this log through official channels. It was recovered from her personal effects. She wrote in her first entry, "The sound is not coming from the vents. The sound is coming from the root. I think I have known this for several weeks and not allowed myself to know it. Tonight I put my ear against the polymer seal over section 7E, and I could feel the vibration before I could hear it. It moved through the bone behind my ear. It felt very old. It felt like trying to remember something from before you had language for remembering." By April of 1986, 3 researchers had independently requested transfers. Their requests were denied. The denial memorandum, signed by someone identified in the file only as Project Oversight Tier 1, reads in full, "Request acknowledged. Transfer not approved at this time. Staff are reminded that Deep Root remains a classified, ongoing operation, and that lateral communication regarding project activities constitutes a federal security violation." It is a very short memo. It was clearly written by someone who had not spent a single night underground. The term that begins appearing in the internal communications starting in the summer of 1986 is encroachment. Not an intrusion, not a breach. Encroachment. The slow, incremental advance of something that has all the time in the world and knows it. Root sections that had been cataloged in previous surveys were no longer where the surveys said they were. The polymer seals, which had been rated for structural integrity over a 20-year period, were showing microfractures at multiple points, not from pressure, the engineers noted with some bewilderment, but from what appeared to be directional growth. The roots were not pressing outward blindly the way roots do. They were finding the gaps. They were following the gaps inward. Dr. Okafor's personal log from October 1986 contains an entry that I want to read to you carefully, because the language in it is specific, and it deserves the weight of specific language. She writes, "I examined my left forearm in the bathroom mirror this morning for 4 minutes before I understood what I was looking at. The vein on the interior of my wrist, the one that is always tracked slightly to the left as it approaches the elbow, has changed course. It now runs straight toward a discoloration that appeared 2 weeks ago, and that I have been telling myself is a bruise. It is not a bruise. The skin above it is slightly raised and slightly warm, and when I press it, there is something beneath it that does not feel like a vein. It feels more like bark." I am going to finish this entry, And then I am going to go back to the equipment bay, and I am going to listen to the route. And I think I already know what I will hear. I think I have known for a long time. I think the tree has been talking to us since before we turned on a single piece of equipment. I think we simply learned eventually to listen in the way it required. Site 9 was officially decommissioned in the spring of 1988. The decommissioning report, 4 paragraphs, bureaucratically immaculate, cites project completion and resource reallocation as the reasons for closure. It does not mention the personnel. Of the 9 staff assigned to Site 9 at the time of decommission, the case file accounts for 4. 2 were transferred, their subsequent assignments redacted. 1 was medically discharged and is noted as deceased, 1991, cause unspecified. 1, the signals analyst from Station 12, appears in a single follow-up document, a psychiatric evaluation, the conclusion of which has been blacked out so thoroughly that even the paper beneath it appears darker. Dr. Okafor is not mentioned in the decommissioning report at all. Dr. Mosswood, whose voice you heard at the beginning of this file, appears only as a name in an administrative appendix, listed under the header Personnel, Status Unresolved. Raymond Folger, the technician who first heard the voice in the ventilation system, the man who heard a word that was almost finished being said. Raymond Folger does not appear anywhere in the decommissioning documentation. He does not appear in any personnel records after March of 1987. His name occurs one final time in the case file, in a handwritten notation on an internal memo that was apparently never meant to be filed. The notation reads, Folger found in sub-level 3 junction corridor, unresponsive. Radiology indicates significant cortical changes. Origin unknown. Root tissue identified in subcutaneous sample, anterior left arm. Recommend immediate. The sentence does not finish. I have driven past the Chestnut Ridge twice since I received this document. You can see the alderman oak from the state road, if you know where to look. It stands on the bluff above the valley, alone now. The surrounding timber was cleared during the construction and never replanted. 400 years old by the last count anyone official was willing to commit to. Likely older. White oaks of sufficient age begin to develop a bark texture unlike younger trees, gnarled and deeply furrowed. The ridges between the channels so sharp and pronounced that the surface begins to resemble something other than wood. something that the eye keeps trying to resolve into a more familiar shape. I did not stop the car. Both times I drove past, it was late afternoon, and the light was the particular low amber of an Appalachian autumn, and the shadows under the oak's crown were very deep and very still. And both times I had the windows down, and the air coming off the ridge had that smell, that cold, wet earth smell of deep soil and old root, and the particular darkness that lives 40 feet underground, where no light has ever reached, and no sound reaches either, except perhaps the slow electrical murmur of something 4 centuries old, sorting through the frequencies, learning to listen, learning to speak. Both times I drove past without stopping. I want to be very clear that it was a choice, that I chose actively not to stop. I want to be clear that it felt like a choice. The alderman oak was not removed following the decommissioning of Site 9. No public record of the facility's existence has been confirmed. The bluff on which the tree stands is listed in West Virginia County records as Federal Land Reserve, category unspecified. Access is discouraged. Dr. Claire Mosswood's final audio log, tape 88B, side 2, was never recovered.